The roof had already caved in when he stopped to water his horse. But it wasn't the roof that stopped him. It was the woman on the ladder. She didn't want his help. That much was clear from 20 yards away. But he mentioned his dead wife, and something in her shoulders changed. The roof had already caved in. That's where this starts. Not with the man, not with the woman, not with the quiet catastrophe that was about to rearrange both their lives. It starts with a broken building and a guy who should have kept riding. Elias Cain sat his horse at the creek crossing, reins loose in one hand, the other hooked by the thumb into the pocket of that faded charcoal-brown vest he wore like a second skin. His horse drank. He didn't move. Pale gray-blue eyes fixed on the property up the slope, the one he'd passed a dozen times in the last year and a half on his circuit between Trinidad and Walsenburg. He knew it the way you know a fence post or a particular bend in the road. Background. Furniture, something you stop seeing. But today the south wall had given up. The corner beam had buckled inward, dragging half the roofline down with it like a jaw gone slack. Timber hung at angles that made no structural sense. The barn door dangled from one hinge, swaying in a wind that barely existed. 3 fence sections lay flat in the dirt, posts snapped clean. The place looked like it had decided to die and was about halfway through the process. However, there was a vegetable garden, neat rows, staked tomatoes, a line of runner beans climbing twine between 2 posts someone had driven recently, because the wood was still pale where it met the soil. Whoever lived here was losing, but they hadn't quit. That garden was a fist raised against gravity, and Elias Cain, a man who hadn't stopped moving in 3 years, pulled his horse up and tied it to the fence rail. Now here's the question you should be asking. Why? He had an appointment. A cattle count in Walsenburg, 2 days' ride south. His entire existence was built around appointments, around movement, around never being in one place long enough for the silence to catch up. So why would a man like that walk toward a stranger's collapsing house? The answer is a thin brass wedding band, dulled and scratched, still sitting on the ring finger of his left hand, and a woman named Mary, who'd been dead since the winter of 1881. Let me take you back. Elias Cain was 52 years old. He'd been a homesteader outside Pueblo for 9 years, married for 7 of them, and then one February the cold got into Mary's chest and wouldn't leave. Pneumonia. The word sounds almost gentle if you say it fast enough. It wasn't gentle. It took 11 days. He held her hand for every one of them, and on the 12th morning, he woke up next to a body that was no longer his wife. And something inside him, not his heart, something more structural than that, something load-bearing, simply cracked. He sold the homestead within 2 months, kept the horse, the saddle, a canvas bag of clothes, and the wedding band. Got himself licensed as a circuit-riding cattle appraiser for the Territorial Livestock Association. Good work for a man who wanted to disappear. You ride from ranch to ranch, count heads, write figures in a ledger, sleep in barns or under open sky, and never stay anywhere long enough to become a person someone might miss. He told himself he was working. He was good at telling himself things. But what Elias Cain was actually doing, if you watched him from a distance, was making himself smaller, season by season, mile by mile, eating less, talking less, needing less. Disappearing by degrees, the way a creek dries up in August, not all at once, but so steadily that one day you look and there's just a line of dark stones where water used to be. 3 years of that. 3 years of movement without destination, labor without purpose, mornings that arrived whether he wanted them to or not. The steel-gray hair had gone fully white at his temples. The sun freckles across the bridge of his nose had deepened. His hands were still strong, still capable, but they hadn't built anything since Mary died. And then today, this roof, this garden. He walked up the slope, boots scuffing through dry grass, and that's when he saw her. A woman on a ladder. The ladder was too short for the job by at least 2 feet, propped against the damaged eave at an angle that would have made any carpenter wince. She was reaching overhead, bare hands gripping a piece of splintered timber, trying to pull it free before it fell on its own terms. Dark chestnut hair, pulled back in a loose bun at the nape of her neck, strands escaping around her temples. Faded sage-green work dress with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. A tarnished silver locket catching light at her throat. She was maybe 5'4", and she was fighting that roof like it owed her money. Josie Lockwood, 34 years old, 11 months alone on this property since her husband Samuel went under a horse on a mountain trail and didn't come back. But Elias didn't know any of that yet. All he knew was the ladder was wrong and the timber was dangerous, and he couldn't make his feet walk back to the creek. She heard him coming, looked down, her amber-brown eyes narrowed, not with fear, but with the specific exhaustion of a woman who'd been offered pity by every well-meaning soul in San Isabel for almost a year, and had learned to hate the taste of it. "I don't need help," she said, flat, final. The way you close a door you don't intend to open again. Elias stopped, thumbs hooked in his vest. He looked at the ladder, looked at the roof, looked at her. "I can see that," he said, then quieter. "My late wife would haunt me from here to Walsenburg if I rode past a caved-in roof without stopping." Something changed, not dramatically. Josie Lockwood didn't smile, didn't soften in any way you could point to. But her grip on that timber shifted, one widow recognizing another. The geometry of the moment rearranging itself around a shared wound neither of them named out loud. She came down the ladder. He climbed up. The damage was bad. 2 main beams on the south side had rotted through. Water damage, probably from a leak that started small and got ignored while life piled its own disasters on top. But the north side framing was sound. The bones of the house were still good, fixable. He ran his hand along a joist, feeling the grain, and the old knowledge came back to him like a language he hadn't spoken in years but never forgot. 3 days, he said, climbing down. With the right timber, 3 days of work. Josie stood with one hand resting on her hip, the other wiping her palms on her tan canvas apron. She studied him. The pale birthmark on the left side of his neck, the scratched brass ring. The way he stood, slightly forward, deliberate, unhurried. A man who meant what he said and didn't say more than he meant. "I can offer you supper in the barn," she said. He accepted both. 3 days, that's what he told her. But the story of Elias Cain and Josie Lockwood was never going to fit inside 3 days. And the reason why has everything to do with a man named Virgil Pruitt, a debt at a bank in Trinidad, and a question Josie Lockwood will never ask out loud. 3 days, that was the deal. But by the morning of the second day, Elias already knew the math didn't work, and not just the math of the roof. He started at first light. Before Josie was even out of the house, before the coffee smell drifted across the yard, Elias Cain was already up on that roof with a claw hammer and a carpenter's eye he'd inherited from a man who never got to use it long enough. His father had been a furniture maker in Pennsylvania. Fine joinery, dovetail corners, the kind of work that made wood sing. Then the family moved west when Elias was 19, and fine joinery became fence posts and barn beams and whatever else the land demanded. But the eye stayed. The understanding of grain and load and where a timber wants to break before it knows it's breaking. He pulled back the first rotted section and ran his thumb along the exposed rafter, felt the softness where water had been working for years, not months, years. This roof didn't fail all at once. It failed slowly, the way most things do. One storm at a time, one postponed repair at a time, one more season of a man saying he'd get to it. And Elias understood that, because he'd been that man once too. Just about different things. However, here's what changed the arithmetic. Josie came out at dawn with 2 cups of coffee and climbed the ladder without being asked. She didn't hover. She didn't make conversation for the sake of filling silence. She watched him work for 10 minutes, studying his hands. And then she started handing him tools, the right ones, before he asked. The claw hammer when he pried, the hand saw when he measured and marked. She read the rhythm of the work the way some people read weather, not by thinking about it, but by paying attention so hard it became instinct. And Elias, who had worked alone for 3 years and preferred it that way, found himself adjusting his pace, not slowing down, just making room. They talked in fragments, short sentences about the wood, about the pitch of the beams, about whether the cedar he'd found stacked behind the barn was seasoned enough to hold. "Grain's tight on this one," he said, turning a board in his calloused hands. That thin brass wedding band, catching the morning light, dulled and scratched from years of exactly this kind of work. "Charles bought that lumber 2 springs ago," Josie said, "for this roof." One sentence, but it carried the whole weight of a dead man's good intentions. Elias set the board down carefully. "It's good lumber," he said, and that was all either of them needed to say about Charles Lockwood right then. But the evenings were different. The porch faced west. The Sangre de Cristos caught the last light and held it like a breath. And Josie would bring out coffee, or once, a small glass of whiskey she apologized for because it was cheap, and Elias told her cheap whiskey was the only honest kind. They sat in the 2 chairs Charles had built, sturdy enough, but the armrests were different heights. Another unfinished thing, another almost. And that first evening, the story came out. Not all at once. Josie Lockwood didn't unspool her grief like thread. She laid it out in pieces, the way you'd lay out tools on a workbench, each one placed deliberately, each one accounted for. Charles Lockwood, a decent man. Everybody said so, and Josie said so too, and she meant it. But decent and capable aren't the same word, and Charles was living proof. He was a dreamer in a land that punished dreamers. Always starting projects, the chicken coop he half-built, the irrigation ditch he dug 40 feet of before abandoning, the second pasture he cleared but never fenced, and the roof. Always the roof. 2 years it needed repair before he died. 2 years of buckets in the hallway during spring rains. 2 years of him saying, "Next month." She didn't speak bitterly. That's the thing. Bitterness would have been easier to listen to, honestly, because bitterness has edges you can hold. What Josie had was worse. She had the honest, bone-deep fatigue of a woman who loved an imperfect man and was now carrying the full weight of his unfinished life on her squared shoulders, one hand resting on her hip the way she always stood, like she was bracing against something invisible. 22 head of cattle, a milk cow, chickens, a property she could not maintain alone and could not sell, because Charles died with debts she was still discovering. A feed bill here, a lumber account there. Small debts, but they kept surfacing like stones in a spring field. Just when you thought you'd cleared the last one. And San Isabel watched. That's the part that should make your blood simmer. The town didn't help. The town observed. Josie Lockwood became a subject of pity at the general store, of mild gossip at the church social, of concerned head-shaking among men who thought they knew what a woman alone needed. Several had suggested she remarry. Not cruelly, not directly, but the way people suggest things in small towns, through implication, through offers of help that carry conditions, through the slow grinding pressure that treats a capable woman on her own as a problem. Not a person, a problem. One that gets solved by attaching her to a man, any man, like she's a loose fence rail that just needs a nail. Nobody asked Josie what she wanted. Nobody considered that she might be handling it. Slowly, badly, with her fingernails digging into every day, but handling it. Elias saw it. He didn't say he saw it, but he saw it. 3 days became 4. The barn roof needed work too. Not as urgent, but real damage, the kind that would cost her a winter's worth of hay if it wasn't addressed before the first snow. Elias told Josie he'd stay to patch it. She nodded, didn't argue, didn't thank him excessively. Just nodded, and that nod told him she understood exactly what he was doing and was choosing not to name it. He sent word to Walsenburg that he'd be delayed. But here's the turn. Here's the thing that kept him awake that 4th night in the barn, staring at the dark rafters above his bedroll. He didn't send that word reluctantly. He wrote the message and handed it to the mail rider with something close to relief. Relief that he had a reason to stay. Relief that the reason was real enough to justify itself. And that scared Elias Cain more than any rotted beam or coming winter. Because he recognized the feeling. He'd felt it once before, 30 years ago, when a girl named Mary laughed at something he said, and he thought, I would build a house just to hear that sound inside it. 5 days now. The porch again. The mountains going purple and gold, and then just purple, the way they do when the sun gives up its argument with the horizon. Josie sat in her chair with her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, that small, tarnished silver locket resting against her collarbone, catching the last light. Elias sat in his, the brim of his dusty tan hat low over those pale gray-blue eyes, his close-trimmed beard white along the jawline. She'd asked about Mary. Carefully, the way you'd touch a bruise to see if it still hurts. And Elias told her, sparingly, the way he told everything. Mary's laugh, Mary's garden, the way Mary could look at a sick calf and know in 10 seconds whether it would live or die. Small things, specific things, the things that stay when the big memories blur. Josie listened with her whole stillness, not leaning forward, not nodding, not filling the pauses. Just still, present, the way few people are, because most people listen with their next sentence already forming. On the 5th evening, sitting on the porch with the mountains going purple, Josie says something that stops him cold. You talk about her like she's standing right behind you. And Elias, for the first time in 3 years, doesn't have an answer ready. He should have left on day 5. The barn roof was a generous excuse, but the corral fence on day 6 was pure invention, and they both knew it. See, here's what nobody tells you about a man who's been moving for 3 years straight. A man like Elias Cain, steel gray hair swept back from that high forehead, pale gray-blue eyes squinting against morning light. That man has built his entire life around the act of leaving. Every town, every ranch, every meal cooked over somebody else's fire. He arrives, he works, he moves. That's the structure. That's the architecture of not feeling anything. And architecture cracks. The corral fence didn't need fixing, not really. A couple of posts leaned maybe 10 degrees off vertical, and the top rail had a split that wouldn't matter for another 2 seasons. But Elias was out there at dawn on day 6, his thin brass wedding band catching the early light as he worked a post-hole digger into ground that didn't want to give. His Walsenburg appointment gone, just gone.
3 days past due. The rancher down there had probably already hired someone else, and the circuit that kept Elias moving from job to job across 4 territories was now broken for the first time since Margaret died. He was letting it break. That's the part that should terrify you, not the staying, the letting. But here's the thing about a cracking structure. Other people noticed the sound. Around midday, a rider appeared on the south road. Good horse, big man, the kind of arrival that changes the weight of the air before you even see a face. Virgil Pruitt rode onto Josie Lockwood's property the way a man walks through a house he's already bought in his mind. Slow, appraising. His small dark eyes moved from the fresh lumber on the barn roof to the corral where Elias stood with a hammer in his hand, and something tightened behind that broad, flat face. He was stocky, thick through the chest and forearms, silver-white hair combed flat against his skull, ruddy cheeks flushed pink above bushy silver sideburns. Black wool coat buttoned over a white collarless shirt despite the heat. Polished black boots with silver buckles, a gold pocket watch chain looping from his vest like a declaration of intent. Everything about Virgil Pruitt announced ownership. Of what exactly remained the question. He didn't dismount right away, just sat his horse and looked down at Elias the way you'd look at a stain on a tablecloth you were considering purchasing. "Josie," he called toward the house, not taking his eyes off Elias. "Didn't know you'd taken on hired help." Josie came out wiping her hands on that worn tan apron, the tarnished silver locket catching light at her throat. Her amber brown eyes were careful, guarded in a way Elias hadn't seen before. "Mr. Cain's been helping with the roof," she said, neutral, measured. "The roof." Pruitt repeated it like he was tasting something sour. He finally looked at Josie, and his chin lifted, that chest-forward, feet-planted posture of a man who believes his presence is a gift. "And what's the arrangement, exactly? Because I'd hate to think a woman in your position was being taken advantage of by some drifter." A woman in your position. Let that sit for a second. Let it curdle. He said it with a smile. That's the worst part. Virgil Pruitt smiled like a man offering you shelter while he measured your windows for bars. Elias said nothing, just stood by the corral with the hammer loose in his hand, his thumbs hooked into his vest pockets after he set it down, watching. Josie handled it, told Pruitt the work was nearly done, thanked him for his concern, used the word concern like a woman sheathing a knife. Pruitt lingered another 10 minutes, asked about the well pump, asked about the north pasture, asked questions that weren't questions at all, but inventories. Then he touched the brim of his black, flat-crowned hat, told Josie he'd check in again soon, and rode south. Check in. Like she was livestock. After the sound of hooves faded, Josie stood on the porch and didn't move. However, and this is important, her stillness was different now. Not the composed quiet Elias had come to recognize over 6 days. This was the stillness of someone holding something down. Anger, maybe. Or fear wearing anger's face. She told him the truth that afternoon, sitting on the porch steps while Elias leaned against the rail. Her voice was flat and precise, the way people talk when they've rehearsed something alone too many times. Charles Lockwood had died owing money.
Not a fortune, debts to the bank in Trinidad, a feed supplier, a lumber account. Normal frontier debt, the kind every small rancher carried. But Virgil Pruitt had offered to buy that debt from the bank. All of it, consolidated under his name.
Which would make Josie beholden not to an institution, but to a man. One man. A man who'd made it abundantly clear that marriage was the implied settlement. She'd refused him twice. The second time, Josie said, and her strong, capable hands went still in her lap. He told me I should be grateful anyone was offering at all. Said a woman alone out here was just a problem waiting to happen. A problem waiting to happen. That's what Virgil Pruitt called a woman who ran a ranch alone through a Colorado winter, who could split wood and mend tack and keep 20 head of cattle alive on land that tried to kill everything on it. A problem. Elias's angular jaw tightened. The small, pale birthmark on the left side of his neck stood out against skin gone darker with held-back fury. He didn't speak for a long time, because now he understood. This is the pivot. This is where the small noise becomes the catastrophic failure.
What looked like a collapsed roof and some broken fences, what looked like bad luck and deferred maintenance, was actually something else entirely. A siege. Slow, patient, financial. Virgil Pruitt wasn't just a pushy neighbor. He was a man systematically surrounding a woman's independence, purchasing it out from under her one fence post, one debt, one refused proposal at a time. The roof was never the real problem. The fences were never the real problem. The real problem was that Josie Lockwood was running out of time, and the only person who'd noticed was a man who wasn't supposed to stop. That evening, quiet fell over the kitchen like a held breath. Elias asked to see Charles's papers. Josie hesitated. You could see it in the way her left eyebrow lifted, that slight asymmetry, the fractional pause of a woman deciding whether to let someone that close to her wound. Then she brought out a wooden box from the bedroom. Letters from the bank, a feed account ledger, a lumber receipt. Elias sits at Josie's kitchen table with Charles Lockwood's papers spread before him, and the number staring back at him is $140. He has $200 in his saddlebag. He says nothing about this, not yet. But the mathematics of what he's about to do have already begun. The 7th morning. The roof is done, and Elias Cain is about to make the hardest ride of his life, not because of where he's going, but because of what he's leaving behind. He'd spent the previous night going over those numbers again. $140, $200 in his saddlebag. The mathematics were clean and terrible and simple, the way frontier math always is. But that's not what kept him awake. What kept him awake was the sound of Josie Lockwood moving through the house below him, the soft creak of her boots on the kitchen floor, the clink of a glass being set down, the particular silence of a woman who has learned to live inside her own loneliness like it's a room she can't leave. He folded the papers before dawn, put them back exactly where she'd left them, said nothing. Now here's the moment that matters. Morning light, clean October gold, the kind that only happens in southern Colorado when the sky has emptied itself of everything except clarity, falls through the south room window for the first time in months. Not broken light, not light filtered through canvas tarp and splintered wood and the gaps where rain got in. Whole light, complete. The window frame catches it and throws a perfect rectangle across the new floorboards, and the smell in that room is cedar and pine pitch and fresh-cut timber, the smell of something that has been opened and then closed again, properly, the way it should be. Josie walks in alone. She doesn't know he's watching.
She stands in the center of that restored room, the room where Charles probably sat, where the roof caved in during the spring storms, where the sky had been her ceiling for months, and she puts her hand flat against the new beam, the one Elias cut and shaped and fitted himself. Her fingers spread across the grain, and then she leans forward and presses her forehead to the wood. The sound she makes isn't loud. It's barely a sound at all. A single breath that breaks halfway through, and then another, and then her shoulders are shaking, and she's crying into the beam with both hands pressed against it. And this isn't grief. This is something else entirely. This is the sound a person makes when something has been broken for so long that the act of it being fixed feels almost violent. Like the relief itself is a wound. Like the absence of pain is its own kind of shock. Her tarnished silver locket swings forward on its chain and taps against the wood. Once. Twice. A small metronome counting out the seconds of a woman letting herself feel something she hasn't allowed in a year. Elias watches from the doorway. His pale gray-blue eyes are steady. His hands hang at his sides. The brass wedding band on his left ring finger, dulled, scratched, worn thin at the back from 3 years of fence posts and saddle leather and the quiet friction of a life lived alone, catches that same October light. His horse is saddled in the barn. His bedroll is tied. His life is designed for exactly this moment, the leaving. 3 years of practice, every road leading away from the last place he stopped. Mary's voice in his memory, not asking him to stay, because Mary is gone, and the dead don't ask for anything, they just wait. The structure of disappearing. He's built it carefully. You ride in, you fix what needs fixing. You ride out before the place starts to feel like yours, before the quiet starts to sound like home instead of silence, before a woman's breathing in the next room becomes something you listen for instead of something you overhear. He should leave now, right now, before she turns around. But Josie turns around. She sees him. Her eyes, amber brown, wide set, the fine lines at their corners deeper now from the crying, meet his across the room. She wipes her face with the back of her hand, doesn't apologize, doesn't explain. Josie Lockwood is not a woman who explains her tears. And then she says it, quietly, without drama, without reaching for him or stepping closer or doing any of the things that would make this easier to walk away from. I'm not going to ask you to stay. 5 words. A door opened and closed in the same breath. But I want you to know that if you did, I wouldn't be asking out of need. She pauses. Her hand finds the locket at her throat, holds it. This house has been quiet for a year, and you're the first person who made the quiet feel like peace instead of punishment. That line. I need you to sit with that line for a second. Because what Josie Lockwood just did is one of the bravest things a person can do on the frontier or anywhere else. She told a man who was leaving that she wanted him to stay, but she stripped the desperation out of it. She didn't say, I need you. She didn't say, I can't do this alone. She said the quiet changed when you were in it. She offered him something without trapping him inside the offering. She gave him a door he could walk through or walk past. And she did it knowing he'd probably walk past. What that costs a woman who's already been left once by death. What that costs a woman with $140 in debt, and a man like Virgil Pruitt circling her property like a vulture in a black wool coat. What that costs her to stand there with her chin level and her shoulders squared and her eyes steady and say it anyway. Everything. It costs everything. Elias says nothing. He touches the brim of his dusty tan hat. He nods once, and he walks to the barn. He rides out. The road south toward Walsenburg unrolls in front of him like a sentence he's read before. Dust and sage and the long brown slope of the valley falling away toward the pass. Behind him, the barn, the fence line he mended, the mended roof sitting against the ridge like it's always been there, like it was never broken at all. Josie's silhouette in the doorway,
getting smaller, then gone. He's done this 100 times, 100 barns, 100 fence lines, 100 doorways with someone standing in them watching him go. Leaving is what Elias Cain does. It's the one skill he's perfected since Mary died. The art of becoming no one's problem. The discipline of vanishing before you become someone's hope. But something is wrong. The road feels different. Not harder, wrong. Like a sentence with the words in the wrong order. Like a door that opens the wrong direction.
Every hoofbeat sounds like a question he can't answer, and the farther he rides, the louder it gets. 1 mile, 2, 3, 4 miles down the road toward Walsenburg, Elias Cain stops his horse. He just stops. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains rise to the west, purple and gold in the morning light, their peaks already holding the first snow of the season. The road is empty in both directions. No sound except the wind and the horse breathing and the creak of saddle leather. The brass ring on his finger catches the sun, that thin, scratched circle that has meant, I belong to someone who is gone for 3 years. And Mary is there, not haunting him, not pulling him backward. She's there the way the mountains are there, present, enormous, unchangeable, but not in the way. She's releasing him, not with words. Mary was never much for words either, just with silence. The particular silence of someone who loved you enough to let you go, even from the grave. Elias sits on his horse for a long time, looking at the mountains, thinking about Mary, thinking about a roof that is fixed and a woman who didn't ask him to stay. And then he turns the horse around, but he doesn't ride back to the ranch, not yet. He rides south, toward Trinidad, and what he does there changes everything. He didn't ride back to the ranch. He rode south to Trinidad, to the bank where Charles Lockwood's debts were held, and where Virgil Pruitt's offer was probably already sitting on someone's desk. 14 miles in cold October air, Elias Cain rode them without stopping, his dusty tan hat pulled low against a wind that smelled like pine resin and the first edge of winter. The brass wedding band on his left hand caught the light every time the horse shifted beneath him. He didn't look at it. He didn't need to. He could feel it the way he always felt it. That thin circle of scratched metal reminding him of who he used to be, and maybe, if he was honest, reminding him of who he was about to become. The First National Bank of Trinidad sat on Commercial Street, between a feed store and a lawyer's office. Small building, sandstone front, the kind of place where a man's entire life could be reduced to a column of numbers on a ledger page. Elias tied his horse, walked in, and stood at the counter until a clerk with ink-stained fingers looked up at him with the particular brand of disinterest that bank clerks reserve for men in worn canvas trousers and scuffed brown work boots. "I'm here about the Lockwood account," Elias said. "Charles Lockwood, the outstanding balance?" The clerk pulled the ledger, ran his finger down the page. $140. 3 years of a dead man's mistakes, sitting there like a loaded gun, waiting for someone to pick it up. Elias reached into his vest, that faded charcoal brown wool vest he'd worn through 2 territories and 3 winters, and pulled out the money. Bills and coin. 2/3 of everything he'd saved circuit riding across southern Colorado. 3 years of fixing other people's fences, sleeping in other people's barns,
eating other people's bread. Gone in a single signature. The clerk's eyebrows went up, just slightly, just enough to notice. "You're not kin to the Lockwoods." "No." "And you're paying the full balance." "That's what I said." The clerk wrote the receipt, stamped the clearance certificate, handed it across the counter with the careful neutrality of a man who knows better than to ask questions he doesn't want answered. Elias folded the papers into his vest pocket, walked out. That was it. No fanfare, no dramatic music. Just a man dismantling a siege, removing the weapon before the enemy could fire it. Because that's what Pruitt's offer had always been. Not generosity, not neighborly concern. A siege.
You surround someone with debt and obligation and the slow, grinding pressure of isolation, and eventually they open the gate. Pruitt knew that. He'd been counting on it. The thick gold pocket watch chain on that man's vest wasn't decoration. It was a scoreboard. However, you can't buy what's already been paid for. The ride back took longer. The light changed. That gold afternoon light that turns the whole world into something worth remembering settled across the valley as Elias came up the road toward the Lockwood Ranch. He found Josie in the garden. She was on her knees in the dirt, pulling the last of the season's turnips, her faded sage-green dress dark at the knees with soil. Strands of dark chestnut hair had escaped her bun and fallen around her temples. The tarnished silver locket caught the fading sun at her throat. He dismounted, walked to the garden fence, held out the papers. She stood, wiped her palms on her tan canvas apron, that habitual gesture, automatic, the motion of a woman who never stops working long enough to think about whether she should. She took the papers, read them, and the expression that crossed Josie Lockwood's face broke open every wall Elias Cain had built in 3 years. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't relief. It was something harder to name. The look of a person who has been carrying a weight so long they forgot what standing straight felt like. And then someone lifts it, and the body remembers. And the remembering is almost worse than the carrying, because it means feeling everything you trained yourself not to feel. Her amber-brown eyes held his. The fine lines at their corners deepened. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." The simplest exchange in this whole damn story, and the most devastating. She folded the papers carefully, pressed them against her chest. Then she asked if he was heading back out on the circuit. He looked at the barn, at the fence line he'd already mended once, at the porch where the rocker sat empty. "Barn still available?" "The barn is available," Josie said, "for as long as you want it." And that was the beginning. Not the dramatic beginning. That had already happened, weeks ago, with a leaking roof and a woman standing in the rain. This was the quiet beginning, the real one. Autumn settled over the valley like a held breath. Elias fixed the south fence first, then the east, then rebuilt the barn door that had been hanging crooked since before Charles Lockwood died. Josie worked beside him, not because he asked, not because she needed to prove something, because that's what shared life looks like when two people stop pretending they're alone. They developed a rhythm. He'd split wood in the mornings while she fed the small herd. She'd cook while he mended tack. They ate together on the porch when the weather held, and inside by the stove when it didn't, and neither of them commented on the fact that what had started as a temporary arrangement had quietly become something permanent. His circuit riding life didn't end with a decision. It ended with staying, one day after another, until the road stopped calling and the silence between two people became more comfortable than any conversation he'd had in years. But there was one more thing that needed settling. Pruitt came once more, late November, his polished black boots gleaming, his black flat-crowned hat stiff against the gray sky, his chest puffed forward the way it always was, chin raised, feet planted wide, the posture of a man who believed the world owed him ground. He found Elias mending the front gate. The two men looked at each other. Here's what that look contained: everything that didn't need to be said. Pruitt's small dark eyes took in the mended fence, the repaired barn, the smoke rising from the chimney, the horse in the corral that wasn't going anywhere. He saw a man with pale gray-blue eyes and a close-trimmed salt-and-pepper beard who was not visiting, who was not passing through, who was holding a hammer in one hand and a fence post in the other, and standing on ground he intended to keep standing on. Pruitt's jaw worked. That heavy jowled chin tightened. But here's the thing about a siege. Once the walls are repaired and the debts are cleared and there's someone inside who isn't leaving, the siege is over. You don't need a battle. You don't need a confrontation. You just need a man who stays. Pruitt turned his horse, rode down the road toward his own spread. His back was stiff. His thick gold watch chain swung with the motion of the horse. He didn't come back. December brought the first real snow. It came soft and steady, the kind that doesn't threaten, just covers. Elias had moved from the barn to the porch rocker in the evenings without either of them discussing it. Josie had started setting two places at the table without commenting on it. These things happen the way seasons happen, not because someone announces them, because they arrive. On a December evening, with snow falling and the fire going and the roof, his roof, their roof, holding strong above them, Josie sits beside him and leans her shoulder against his. He doesn't move away, neither speaks. Some people are saved by grand gestures, by dramatic rescues and declarations and someone riding in at the last second. But most people, the real ones, the tired ones, the ones who've been carrying weight alone for so long their spine has curved around it, are saved by someone who simply stops, who sees the broken thing and stays long enough to fix it. The quiet between them is no longer empty. It is full, and it is enough.